do you want to do the clap today? I just want to make sure. Will you speak it into that mic?
Hello.
I can't hear you.
Is it because of this? No,
What about now?
Yeah,
oh, I
now I
can
can
hear
hear.
myself.
Yeah.
God, you could do some really weird ASMR. Can you?
Right, okay. Wonderful.
Cool. Ready to rock or what?
Yeah. This
Let me make sure I've got
stand
no
always.
alarms.
When you're ready.
All
Sorry,
right.
I'm just going to make sure none of my alarms are on. You know? I've just got like random alarms. Right, let's go.
Oh, do us a clap. Did you do that already?
And I'll do it again.
Go on then. Good job.
Okay, can I go?
Yeah.
Cool. Welcome back to another episode of the Say It How It Is podcast. We are back with Endo Part 2. After a very successful episode on Season 1, we thought we would bring Mr.G back for round 2.
By popular demand.
By popular demand. He's now a global celebrity around the world. Thank you very much for joining us.
It's a pleasure, as usual, to be here.
And we are joined by Sophie from the Endo Spectrum, who is also a Women's Health Ambassador. So thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I'm really excited for this episode because I learnt an awful lot last time, sort of being the friend of someone with endo, and you know, it's only something recently that I've even, you know, discovered awareness of, sort of when Ffion sort of got diagnosed. So yeah, I'm really keen to sort of learn a little bit more. And yeah, there was a lot of topics that I think we didn't even get the chance to cover last time, even though we were speaking for a very long time, and it felt like we could have just gone on and on and on. So yeah, really excited to get our teeth into it.
Yeah, I want to start with you, Sophie. Obviously, just mentioned that you are founder of the Endo Spectrum, so I just wanted to kind of get into that really, of why you started that and kind of where that's taken you now since that started.
Yeah, absolutely. So I started the Endo Spectrum, it's coming up to 5 years ago now, which is nuts. So it's 5 years this month because it's obviously March Endometriosis Awareness Month. And the reason I started it is because I, like I said, was diagnosed when I was 21, started the page a similar time. But the reason I started it is because it took 5 years for me to be diagnosed, which now, after like learning so much from people like you and learning from my own diagnosis, that actually the average time is 7 to 10 years to be diagnosed. So I went through what I thought was like the most trauma and hell that anyone could go through, and then learned that I was supposed to be lucky in that situation. And I was like, oh my God, there's so many people out there that don't know they have endo. So one, I wanted to raise awareness on what the symptoms were, because I was like, I am textbook endometriosis symptoms, which we'll probably go on to in a little bit anyway. But the real reason I started the page was because I was told after my first surgery for endometriosis, and I was diagnosed formally, that because all my symptoms had come rushing back, that my two options were hysterectomy or have a child. And I was 21 at the time in uni, and I was like, I can't have a kid now. Like, I'm a kid.
Yeah.
But also, I just thought, oh my God, like a hysterectomy is a really serious thing. But I thought that would be the best thing at the time. So luckily, it was a couple of years down the line, I lived my life and met a incredible endometriosis specialist who told me that 1, a baby wouldn't cure it, 2, a hysterectomy wouldn't cure it, and 3, I'd had the wrong surgery, which again, we'll probably talk a little bit about later. So I just wanted people to understand what the symptoms were so that they could hopefully get diagnosed sooner, and to avoid getting pregnant or a hysterectomy when it's probably not going to help you, if not make you even worse. So yeah, that's when I started the Endo Spectrum.
And how has it been now since you started it? Like you said, you started it from your own personal experience.
Mm-hmm.
Like, how has it been with the amount of people that have reached out to you, or like that you feel like you've like been able to support now you've started that page? Because I suppose it's kind of like you're supporting people that, you know, you, if that was you, or
Yeah.
what you're putting out content that you feel like you would need to see. So how has that been?
Yeah, I've loved it. Like, honestly, of everything that I've done in my life, starting that page has been like the best thing I've ever done. And you probably feel the same about your podcast. And it was genuinely starting from a place of like, the first thing you do is social media. Like, you go on social media to like Google a restaurant or whatever. For me, it was like, what do I do now that I have endometriosis? And it was only middle-aged women who were crying about the fact that they couldn't get pregnant. And I was like, I can't have this as my reality. It's making me feel even more depressed. So I was like, one, I want to be a bit more of a positive voice, silver lining, show how I live my life with endo. But two, actually meet people with the condition, because none of my friends had it. I didn't know what it was. I didn't have anyone to speak to. So it's comforted me as well. And I've enjoyed being able to create the content which has helped other people. But I think one of the biggest things, and it's what drives me still to create more content and grow the page, is that so many women are still not seeing the specialist that they need to, or not getting the information they need. Because as much as I can give the information that I've been given, I'm not an endometriosis specialist, which is why I'm so grateful for people like you who are willing to come on podcasts and give that information. So even though I'm really, really glad I've done it, it makes me so sad reading the messages of people that are still going through absolute hell and getting, getting the wrong information from doctors.
Okay, let's go back to when it all kind of started. What symptoms or what were you going through that made you feel like, okay, this isn't normal?
Wrong.
Yeah, something's wrong. And then what were the steps that you took to kind of get that kind of checked, I guess?
Yeah, so I didn't get my period till I was 16, 17. I just turned 17, got my period. And the first one was pretty rough, but I just kind of thought oh God, this is life now. Yeah, exactly. And all my friends were like, oh, come on, we all get cramps, we all get this, whatever. But as time went on, my periods were just getting so heavy and so painful. And I went from being this Duracell bunny who was running around all the time, full of energy and a bit of ADHD, to being I am wiped out. What is this fatigue? And again, I was 16, 17, didn't want to go out anymore. If I did go out, I was really ill. It was more than a hangover. It was a full body, sore, ill pain. So I had the kind of really painful periods, which is typical with endometriosis, but not everyone has painful periods. They were getting heavier and heavier and heavier. I was extremely constipated all the time. I'm talking, would struggle to go even once a week. So I was just in agony with that, and this fatigue. And then I'd started having sex at 18, and that I was right, everyone says this is fun.
This is not fun.
It's who is this fun for? It's not fun for me. I was so it's painful having sex, it's painful after sex. And I was having this swelling after sex and certain foods. And I was this just doesn't seem right. So I went to the GP, and it was just the classic, this is just painful periods. And that was a conversation back and forward for 2 years at school. So I was going through A-levels, getting worse and worse and worse. And it was still painful periods. Let's try a different pill. Oh, you've got to give the pill 3 to 4 months. You're not going to see any changes soon. So you
window
leave it.
3 months.
Oh my God. You're no problem, not a flyby. So it was then 4 months. We're so sorry. We've given you the wrong pill. So we'll give you another one. And then it was, don't know why the doctor gave you that pill. It was a worse pill to give you next one. So it was just different pills all the time. No answer. And then when I went to university, sort of started from scratch, new doctors, but instead of them saying, it's painful periods, it was, how many sexual partners have you had in the last few months? And I was do you understand how painful sex is right now? I wish I was sleeping around. I wish. So it was then honestly, it was genuine. So it was here's a different pill, but let's do an STI check. 17 STI checks later.
17?
Stop it.
All negative.
Sorry, I didn't even register that
Yeah,
number.
is she going to say 17 years old? No, 17.
No. So, and I was young, and at this point, I was
Did they not believe you or something?
Well, so this is the thing. I was I had a boyfriend at uni, only ever slept with him. But they were well, you never know what they get up to and all that. So I was coming home being who you sleeping with?
Yeah,
We
that's
had
very similar
this.
to Anna,
Yeah,
actually.
so on episode part 1 of Endo, Anna said the exact same thing, that she was actually married and they were questioning her, what's your partner doing? She literally said the same thing, and she was I've never denied the tests because, as proof to be it's not the reason why, the fact that you're now putting me into a category that someone's being disloyal.
Yeah, it's so, honestly, paranoia, absolute paranoia. So had all those tests, was going back and forward, and I was this has been 5 years by this point, and I was almost dropping out of uni because I could barely go to lectures. And anyway, went to the GP, and I was please, can someone help me? And he got really excited, the GP, and I was why is he buzzing at all of these symptoms? I'm in pain. And he went to his bag, pulled out this folder, and he'd been to a women's health conference 2 weeks before, and said, I think you've got endometriosis. And it was the first time I'd seen him as a GP, but he just listened to my symptoms, saw that I had a ridiculous amount of testing done, and was just like, this is all very clear. And then that's when I had my laparoscopy, a diagnostic one, so the keyhole one, just to see if something was wrong. They saw cells and like bits that they thought was endo, got it sent off to a lab, and then it was confirmed that it was endometriosis.
So how old are you at that point?
21.
And then how many surgeries have you had in total?
Excluding egg freezing, I've actually had 4 because I had one emergency surgery at school where it was a twisted ovary. And I'm still really frustrated by the surgeon that did it because they said at the time that they saw adhesions, or what I now know as adhesions. They just said my organs were stuck together, but that the ovary was the problem. But looking back, they should have investigated, like, your organs don't stick together for no reason. So there was obviously endometriosis was an issue. My second surgery was the diagnostic one. And then, unfortunately, after that, I found out I'd had the wrong surgery because I'd had ablation surgery, which is just lasering the endometriosis, whereas excision is what I should have had, which is ripping it out at the root. So when I did eventually find an endometriosis specialist, which I had no idea they existed, and they are incredible, the surgeon was like, I'm really sorry, you're going to need another couple of surgeries because you need a proper job. So yeah, I had 4 endometriosis linked surgeries and then 2 egg freezing surgeries. No, I'm 27 as well. Hopefully no more.
And I think it's crazy that, like, that GP, like, what are the chances that he went to a female health, like, special workshop the week before? Like, that shows the importance of the education, I think, because
absolutely,
how many other GPs could be potentially diagnosing? Is it 1 in 10 women?
Yeah, but it's so not 1 in 10.
It's not. It's 1 in 10 now. Probably
it's 1 in
would
10
be more if there was
takes,
more
like,
education.
so
right?
many years to get
exactly. And I just think it shows how important the education side of it is.
Yeah, and I think that on a whole, like, if I talk about my case individually, like, being involved in a sport, like in a professional sport, it's difficult because I feel like I'm the guinea pig in my team because, like I say, there's endometriosis is like this unknown world for a lot of us, and I think now, like, even our like S&C coach or like our nutritionist, like, they're coming up to me and saying like, oh, I'm reading a paper on endo, or like I'm reading this study, and I'm like, oh, thank you, and they're like, no, what do you mean? Like, it's my job, but it's like, for me, it's you don't. I'm like, you don't have to. They're like, no, we do. We do. But I'm like, you don't understand that the time you're taking to do that, like, for someone that's going through it, like,
it means the world.
Yeah, it does. And like, it's especially when you're like the only one in a group of a lot of people, like, that research and that time that you give in, like, makes the difference. But it is hard. We could say we're in this unknown world with this chronic disease. But I mean, that support, I think, is.
I think following on from that, do you want to touch on how your experiences have been the last few weeks? Obviously, I've been like witness to it all. Well, I mean, you're surgeon's here, so it's a good opportunity to chat through it. But obviously, like, as your friend, it's also like it's hard to almost feel helpless, and I'm like, I don't really know. We spoke about it last time.
You're making me warm.
Oh, sorry, hot flash. Like, I just find it hard when I'm like, I don't know what to do. Like, Anyway, you go.
No, no. You go too, because I think it's really important to, like, and we've spoken a lot on the season with different issues and different topics, that, like, it's important to hear the side from someone that's not going through it, or like the supporter or the family member or the friend. Like, so it's important that you view or you ask what you feel like you need to know too, because that support side is also really important. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I just find it hard when I'm like, for example, after you've had a flare and, like, you come back up from training and I'm just like, like, I just would, like, for example, last week or the week before, I was waiting in the team room, and then when you came back or someone came up and said, oh, she's had a flare, and I was like, oh, no. And then I was like, oh, I wasn't there. And then it was, do you know what I mean? Like, how, like, we spoke about it last time about, like, how do I, as the friend, help? And you were really nice and said, you do enough. And I was like, oh, sorry. But it is difficult because I guess there's no physical thing to be able to help. It's just the support. Do you know what I mean? I suppose when you're in a flare, this is my personal experience, in a flare, no one can do anything for me. Like, my flares come from, like, a max exertional exercise. Like, I don't really flare in daily life. It only comes from, like, maximal exertion. And it's like, well, like Gwen mentioned, like, recently it's been like mid-training. So I've had I'd say 5 flares in the last few weeks, and they've been extreme. So like every time I'm running down the field, like boots on, out in the open where I'm very exposed, I've got no toilet to run to, I'm having a flare. And then I had one that was like the worst like I've ever had, like to the point where I couldn't even complete the session, like hit the floor, like collapsed on the floor, and I was literally rolling around like crying, like you'd swear I just snapped my leg, like that's how severe it was. And that was the first time I had a flare in front of people. So usually I can manage it enough where like I feel it's coming and I can move myself just in time, and like I can run to the toilet and it's just me. But this was out in the open, you know, there's a few members of my team and staff that were there, and I was like, I've got nowhere to run. Like I felt so, like exposed, because I had to just like get on with it just in front of everyone. And I did say like I felt a bit embarrassed purely because I have this fear sometimes that I feel like no one believes me, because I think
being dramatic.
Yes, and like with my knee, like I'm rehabbing my knee, I don't feel like that. Like if my knee was sore when I was running, I'd be like, oh, my knee's sore. Like I wouldn't be afraid of people's perception of me if I pulled up for that. When it comes to my stomach, I've just got this completely different fear, and I'm almost like, why? But I think it's because it's so internal and there's such a lack of understanding or awareness around it that like I have this fear that people are like, oh, it's a bit hard really, or she's a bit of a hard session, she's just making an excuse.
I think like for example, like I've obviously been through an ACL, so I know what an ACL pain feels like. However, like the majority of the people don't know what that endo feels like, and I think that's probably why you feel like, oh, do they think that I'm making it up? Because I could be like, yeah, your knee gets sore. I've had a sore knee, but I don't know what it feels like. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. But I also do think that people don't think that, by the way.
Yeah.
Just to let you know.
But I think I didn't know, I suppose this is a good thing to chat to you both around, and I didn't know what my expectations were, because I feel like I'm quite new to this endo world, where I do feel like I'm quite lucky because of the support that I've had with like Wales, with being able to see you, Mr. G, and Tony, quite quickly in relative to, you know, a lot of people don't have that. So post-surgery, and there's one question we've had quite a lot about this episode, is like, I kind of thought I was going to kind of be fixed afterwards. I kind of thought, you know, I'd have the surgery and then I'd be fine. And I've kind of not been like that. Yeah. And like, maybe that's something for like you to answer on, like, why does that happen? Because like I feel like I kind of feel like the symptoms I'm having now are like worse than what it was before, and like there's things I'm trying with my pill and stuff, and like all my hormones, whether I should have a period, where I shouldn't, whether that's more detrimental to me because my cycle's getting all inflamed and stuff. But like, why is it then that maybe you don't feel fixed afterwards?
Yeah, it's a really good question.
Put you on the spot there.
Always.
Why not fixed?
And it's almost, endometriosis, you've done a perfect description of how unpleasant it really is. I often say endometriosis is not period pains, it's so much more. It's a life ruiner. It ruins educational attainment, it ruins relationships, and it ruins employment. It really destroys lives. And that's even the people who've been diagnosed, and there's a population who obviously not diagnosed, which is even worse, or being told there's nothing wrong with them, it's in their head. And there's all these cultural barriers then you've described of, for instance, if I have a sore elbow and I see the GP, they will say, oh, that really is awful, doctor. I can imagine how awful it is. But with pelvic pain, there's this sort of this perception, it's in your head. And we don't quite know why that exists. It's a 1950s weird cultural thing that exists, that housewives shouldn't complain and all this ridiculous stuff. And I think that still exists. Endo, why doesn't it 100% improve after surgical treatment is the answer, really. And I suppose it's our limitations of what therapies we've got out there, which is pain relief, the evidence, it doesn't work very well at all, is the evidence. Hormonal treatment works in some situations, but again, it's not a panacea for all things, without a doubt. And the vast proportion of people don't respond very effectively for hormone treatment. And surgery, we've got two massive databases. One, sadly, is a French database. I accept it's French, particularly after the Six Nations. And that was a single consultant whose practice looked at over a decade. And then he said, if you remove excised endometriosis, what's going to happen to you? What's my chance of success? And in the UK, we were really lucky, actually. For the last decade, we've had a huge database with thousands and thousands of ladies on. And you can put data in, such as where you had your endometriosis, what your symptoms were. And we bombard you with the questions about what your symptoms like are 6 months, 12 months, 24 months, 6 years. And we've got all these massive data sets. You can look at individual data sets and you can kind of predict how people will respond from the operative findings. In the last 12 months, we've got genetic work that's been in the background about 15 years looking at genetics of endometriosis. And there's about 250 different gene mutations, and endo's probably 3 different diseases, and they've got different recurrence rates. That's the problem. So cutting out endometriosis kind of improves symptoms, and you can observe symptoms, but there certainly is a recurrence rate, and there's certainly people who say, well, I'm not better. And if you look at the data set, our kind of usual numbers, we say to people, 8 out of 10 ladies feel a lot better. 2 is, I'm not there, or not enough, where actually this disease is still affecting my life in a major way. There's loads of stuff we can do for that, and that's a really interesting population to look at. But it does, like I always say to every lady with endometriosis, it's never a story where you say, I'm afraid I can't help you. There's loads of stuff we can do. It's kind of almost like a holistic approach, is to see what the symptoms are, see what the cause of the pain is. And then there's a kind of variety of options to deal with that. So people often feel almost disheartened in some ways. You've had surgery, you think, oh, I've got pain. I thought this episode of my life is over. And it's not. At least in 2 out of 10, it's not. But there's other things we can do.
So I'm going to ask a really I'm going to word this the right way. So for people that maybe don't understand, like, if you remove endometriosis, like, why doesn't that fix someone? Does that make sense? Like, why
does it grow back?
Why not? Why does it grow back? Like, why do? For example, now, like, removing my endometriosis, why do I still experience symptoms if it's been removed?
Yeah, it's a really good question.
What's the reason for that?
There's probably a few reasons. Endometriosis is without a doubt a genetic disease, and it does lots of strange things at a biochemical level. It secretes weird molecules. One of them I speak about is this thing, interleukin-8, that's an unpleasant molecule. It gives you that flu-like feeling, achiness. And it's particularly unpleasant because it makes pain receptors more susceptible to pain. It's like the volume on an amplifier. Turns it right
That's
up.
the one.
And we got really good evidence. People with fibromyalgia, for instance, have the same genetic disease as endometriosis. People with chronic migraines, recurrent migraines, chronic back pain in a structurally normal back. The amplifier has been turned up. And so the pain is worse. It really is. So that's at the biochemical level. And I often say our level of endometriosis is like having measles and we're cutting the spots out. There's something still below the surface in real. So cutting out disease, cutting out the inflammation, dampens down, reduces the amount of biochemical unpleasant molecules that are secreted, gets rid of that fibrotic disease that disrupts nerves. But certainly there's microspots of disease there. And it may be in the pelvis, but sadly maybe outside the pelvis, because we know endometriosis is more than a pelvic disease. It can be in the uterine muscle. We've got really good evidence for that. That's been ignored for years, this thing adenomyosis. And that's much, much more common than we think. And that occurs. And the microspots of endometriosis in strange places within the pelvis and the abdomen. And as our imaging technology is improving, we're finding more of it. We've got no biochemical test. We've got a saliva test to say, yes, you have the genes for endometriosis. And so there's certainly a population of ladies who've been laparoscoped and said your pelvis is normal, but their saliva test is positive. So they have endometriosis, just you haven't seen the spots. So that's probably the reason why is you excise disease, people have still got symptoms, there's still microspots or disease still present, and the cells of endometriosis secreting unpleasant molecules.
So you mentioned there about there being endo places other than the pelvis. Where else can it grow? Can it grow anywhere?
Yeah, it's virtually yes is the short answer. And if you look at the literature, you've virtually found endometriosis in virtually every organ in the body.
For God's sake, man! Give us a break!
So, I know. One of our problems are kind of evidence. All our data that we've looked at is really historical and not very good. For instance, endometriosis on the diaphragm, this muscle, this huge muscle group between your chest, is in all textbooks says it's very rare, and that's what's defined as rare. And it's rare because people don't look at your diaphragm. So it's really unusual. So if your normal practice of laparoscopy is to always look at the liver and diaphragm.
You look at the liver.
I always look at the diaphragm
Okay,
and liver, yeah, without a doubt, yeah. And I know people with severe endometriosis, so I see quite a lot. 10% of people have diaphragmatic endometriosis in that population, so it's really common.
And how would that affect someone? So
That's a very good question.
yeah, because obviously it's a significant muscle that's used in
Mine's
breathing.
very tight all the time, if that helps.
It's really interesting. And you often think we describe symptoms of endometriosis. This has been ignored, and they're real classical symptoms.
Yeah.
I'm rolling around in pain once a month, doc. I vomit. I can't do anything. I'm non-functional. Life is awful. Sex is a no-go. It's misery beyond belief. And, you know, to me, that's a zebra. It's not a horse with stripes on. It's obviously endometriosis. It can't be anything else. But then diaphragmatic stuff is ignored. So a classic thing is cyclical chest pain, or particularly more right-sided pain. So some people are saying, well, I've got gallstones. Funny thing, doc, it always occurs every month with my period. And that's, I would think, a relatively easy to diagnosis. But there's much more subtle stuff. People who present with cyclical chest pain, cyclical shortness of breath. The easier one is people who have endometriosis in their lung and they cough up blood at the time of their period every month.
Wow.
And again, this disease we say is really rare in the thorax. We say it's rare, but it's not. It's just we ignore it.
Misdiagnosed, yeah.
I mean, completely a population has been ignored.
One thing I wanted to ask you about is the link with pain, with the sensitivity of like experiencing pain in other places. I think we spoke about it. One of the questions we received as well is about link with shoulder pain. Like, do you mind giving a bit of clarity on that?
Since the 90s, we were looking at this thing, this interleukin-8 molecule. It's one of the unpleasant molecules that endo secretes, and we used to sort of put needles in people's tummies and suck up fluid and measure interleukin-8. And there was a population of ladies who had really severe endometriosis. You looked in the pelvis and you think, oh my gosh, everything's stuck together. And they used to say, never felt a thing, doc. Don't know what you're on about. And those populations had very low interleukin-8 levels. So there was some people get endometriosis and get no symptoms. That's one of the reasons why. But we know interleukin-8 stimulates, causes that kind of fluey, inflammatory, horrible feeling of, I'm aching, my joints are aching, I don't feel right. And the next day you get a cold. And it's that type of horrible feeling. But it's chronic. And so when you ask ladies, rank your symptoms of endometriosis, what's the worst? Virtually always in the top, they say fatigue. And again, it's interleukin-8. And it's more than just, I feel a bit tired, I can have a nap. It's that absolute exhaustion of feeling you've got the flu and you just can't function to any level. So there's a biochemical reason for it. There's some good news. There's some trials coming out of antibody infusions to stop interleukin-8 production. So there's some really new, exciting stuff around the corner.
I was going to ask,
hit me with that.
Yeah, if there's any, because I always talk about it on my Instagram, period flu. Like my face puffs up. It's almost as if I've got like hay fever. My nose is streaming, my eyes are streaming, knackered all the time. And then it's like day one of my period comes and it's like everything flushes away. Like all of my symptoms happen pre-period. And it's the same with like my acne, for example, the bloating, it all just like comes on just before it. So was it interleukin-8 you called it? Sorry. So is this something that you are aware of because you're an endometriosis specialist, or is this something that all gynecologists, because that is the first time I've ever heard of a doctor talking about it. So is it because you have an interest in endometriosis and you're researching it, or is this something that's actually being taught to more doctors?
No, it's really specific for endosurgeons who have academic interest in research.
And so is there a way that, like, I don't know how the doctor world works, but you know when you're in university or in school and you have like guest lecturers or guest teachers coming in, is there a process where you would go in as a guest doctor going in to have talks with GPs? Because I had these flu-like symptoms before my period, and I was even tracking a journal saying like I'm having all of these things, and no doctor picked it up. So is there any way of like cascading that information to other doctors so that they have that information, so that even if people don't have, because not everyone's lucky enough to have a surgeon like you around the corner, but they're able to go to a doctor who's able to recognise those symptoms? Like, is there any form of education, or not really unless the doctor's interested?
Yeah, I think you've nailed it. It is one of the kind of the rules of education is you'll only learn what you want to learn or what you think you need to learn.
Yeah.
And that's the barrier. So there's loads of educational information out there, and we positively encourage, and we see GPs and we invite them to evenings and say, please, you know, you've got loads of poor ladies with endometriosis. You can change their life in 10 minutes because you've just got to acknowledge they have endometriosis and there's things we can do. And I'm going to refer you. And it's not going to be a battle. It's going to be a nice consultation. And I can promise you, she'll be delighted that you've actually acknowledged it. And that's the most important thing of all.
Yeah.
The problem is when you do, for instance, a GP evening, an event, it's the same faces.
Yeah.
And that's your problem. And I don't know how to change that. As clinicians, we have not been successful in that. I think patients' support and groups and empowerment have changed things and driven work in Welsh Assembly government. And so there is a powerful patient voice out there. And I think that is the key to changing things.
I completely agree with you. I think that is a lot of kind of, I think us as sufferers need to support you more on that because especially in my workplace now, as an example, like I say, like I'm the guinea pig and I'm like the first one to be diagnosed. It's new to everyone, and like our physio Joe, who you've met, has even now created this whole PowerPoint on endometriosis and periods, and I mean it is like page long because she's like giving detail and everything because she's like everyone needs to know. Everyone needs to know. You know, like the staff, the coaches need to know who has suffers with their periods. You know, like she completely was like, do you mind me using you? Use me all you want, Joe. Get the information out there because, like, my kind of opinion on this whole thing is I'm not mad at people or upset that people don't know, but it's the people's opinion of learning or being open to learn. Like, if people don't want to learn about it or want to acknowledge it, that's what upsets me because I still don't know enough, but it's about people around me just being just as open. Like if I use an example, like I asked you before this episode, like, what do you want to get out of it? And again, Gwen's like, I just want to learn. I want to ask questions. Like, I learned so much last time. And like, that's the kind of attitude you kind of want when you're going through something. So I suppose it is new, but I suppose we can really push that because, like I say, using my environment as an example then, like, before, if this endometriosis got raised, they'd be like, what on earth is that? But now it's like, no, you've got someone that's going through it. There's probably other people in the whole organisation that may be suffering.
This is
also.
what I was going to say, is that like if you use that statistic of 1 in 10 women have endometriosis, and that's probably actually more than 1 in 10, and you look in an organisation where there's probably, including female staff, 40 women, which
is actually 46 in the current squad.
Yeah. 46
in the
members. Wow.
Yeah,
okay,
46,
in that case, 50, which means that there's probably a minimum of 5 women, in theory, in our team room at any one time that have endometriosis and 1 diagnosed. Do you know, so it's and I find it so interesting about how big the spectrum of symptoms are. Like how some women can have no symptoms, they might have 1 or 2 symptoms or all of the symptoms, and then it's almost how do then, like, I started spiraling in my head about, like, could there be a questionnaire where you put it out to female athletes, for example, and you say, tick all boxes that apply, and you put every single symptom, and then it's almost like a connect the dots if you score this many out of 10, or if you score this, and then almost like, it's hard, I suppose, because obviously is the only diagnostic tool is the I can't say it. Can't say the word. Yeah, that one.
I can
it's
say
not
that.
very often that you can say a word
over
me. Is that the only for certain diagnostic, or I know you mentioned saliva and that kind of thing?
It's interesting. We say laparoscopy is the gold standard test, and I hate the word gold standard because it sounds like it's really accurate.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't say it's more like the bronze standard, because we got really good data to say people who come to our endometriosis centre, a third have been laparoscoped already. And we know severe endometriosis, for instance, is a non-progressive disease. If you've got a lump of endometriosis growing on your rectal wall, it's always been there. It didn't just grow over 10 years, you always had it. And you always had those symptoms as a teenager. And we laparoscope people and we say, you've got severe stage 4, horrible endometriosis. You've had it since your teens. It's a congenital disease. And people say, but I've been laparoscoped. And I was told it was normal. So we know laparoscopy is not perfect. It does miss disease there. So that's one problem. Symptoms in itself is a really good diagnostic test. And 15 years ago, we put all these symptoms in this computer model. And we challenged the computer to say, what questions can you ask ladies that would predict endometriosis with accuracy? And if you say yes to one of these questions, you got about 98% chance of endometriosis, which is pretty good as a test.
See, this scares me because Ffion told me the questions and she was telling me, and I was like, yep.
I know.
And then I know you're worried about me.
I know. I am.
But it like, I actually think that there's so many women, so many women that would say yes to multiple of those things.
I'm not going to diagnose you on this podcast, but I see you in your period and I'm like, I don't say anything to you because I'm like, don't want to stress you out or anything, but you give me red flags, girl. You do.
There's actually something funny you've both just said. So you asked about a questionnaire and you just said red flags, and there's something that is called the Red Flag Campaign, and it's not launched yet. I don't know when this podcast comes out, but if it comes out in a week or two.
You're right, we say.
Yeah, there we go, yeah. Well, it's in that case great because it's called isitendo.co.uk and it's called the Red Flag Campaign.
No way.
And it's, do you have these red flags of endometriosis? But
My heart's going.
But on top of that, there is actually a symptom checker where you can chat to this questionnaire and put in your symptoms. And it's so helpful. But it's funny how when you are diagnosed, you're looking at all your friends are going, you'll have it, you have it, you have it. And since 2 of my friends have been diagnosed with endometriosis, after years of being told it's just IBS, it's just bowel problems, it's just food intolerances, which like it could be IBS, it could be food intolerances, fine. But there is also, like we've just said, endometriosis found outside of the pelvis. For example, like I've on the outside of my bowel, I've always had this issue with my bowels. One thing I wanted to do as well, because I know sometimes when we talked about how like we've both had surgery, my symptoms are definitely back. But there is still a pro in having surgery, isn't there? Because, and this was one of the questions I always get asked, yes, if your symptoms come back, it's still crap. But if you have the surgery, at least you're stopping the endometriosis in wherever you've had it operated on, going into the organs. Is that right? Because someone asked me, what happens if they leave my endometriosis on the outside of my bowel? Is it going to infiltrate the bowel? Which I think it can be the case.
Yeah, it's a good question. The Americans, about 5 years ago, we started looking at people who came to see with absolutely horrendous pelvis, things stuck down and distorted. And we would say to these ladies, that is a real mess. The adhesions are phenomenal. This is going to be an adverse effect upon fertility. But their pelvis never started like that.
Yeah.
And so there is a place for treating people to avoid adhesion formation and infertility at a latter point.
Yeah.
Endometriosis can get worse and block things. It can block tubes and kidney to bladder. People lose kidneys because of it. Endo, there is positive though. Endo and bowel, if it's full thickness already, it's always been full thickness. So if you're on the outside of the bowel, it won't invade bowel wall.
That's so interesting.
It can obstruct bowel wall and you can get pretty severe disease, and people end up with absolute constipation where they can't open their bowels and they've got a bowel resection. But it's kind of an external compression as opposed to eating its way through. So if you've got severe rectal disease, you've always had severe
always
rectal
had
disease.
it. So interesting. And I think as well it like helped to the silver lining probably for both of us, because it is easy to say, well, what was the point of having that surgery? What was the point of going through the pain and having scar tissue and whatever, when actually it has helped stop those like extreme situations where it keeps growing. But it's also reassuring to know that actually it's not going to go into the bowel if it's just on the outside. Yes.
That's why I asked the question of, why do I still experience symptoms even though I've had it removed? Because I had surgery, like it's removed. That's why I was like trying to understand that, because one thing I want to speak to you about is, I know you speak about a lot on your pages about the fatigue.
Yeah.
Because, oh my God, that's kind of what flagged it the most. Like, yes, the painful periods and stuff like that, but it was the fatigue that I was like, why am I so tired all of the time? And like, I think I dismissed it a lot because being an athlete, I was like, it's just because I train all the time and I train really hard.
It's hard to
see. But then I was watching everybody else and I was like, why is nobody else as tired as me?
Yeah.
And I think like, again, like it's been so bad recently that like I've just been absolutely exhausted. And then on the back of my flares, especially, I think it's hard with my job because my job is like I exercise all day. So, and then having a flare, then it normally wipes me out for the day, but I've got like 4 more sessions to do. So I think that's quite hard. But how do you manage your fatigue? Because I know now you're full-time with Endo Spectrum. Is that something you, like, did you choose that line of work because of what you're going through with your endo?
Yeah, 100%. So it was like so nice for me to hear how much work Wales are doing with you in terms of educating other people on endometriosis, because I think with endo, like we've already spoken about, it's going to grow back, it's chronic, you've got it for life. And it's why I'm so interested in what I call like the hippy dippy side of endometriosis, because your perception of pain and perception of having something chronic has a huge impact on your mental health. And for me, especially, my mental stress can flare my endometriosis just as much as a HIIT exercise can. So for me, when I'm feeling down in the dumps about something, or I feel like I've hit a wall, like say now I'm in a flare and I'm just like, for fuck's sake, like I've got this really important meeting that I want to go to, and now I just feel like I can't be 100%. Like I'm then in a stressed state going into said meeting, and it's with someone who understands endometriosis and cares about endometriosis, and I'm already feeling calmer and more able to approach that situation. Like you probably have had a flare now and turned up to work because you know it's accepted and you can chat about it, whereas before you might have just said, oh, I'm ill, I can't come in today. And at work, the first manager I ever had was honestly an angel, and he was just so understanding from the get-go, really like made me feel at ease at work, just said, oh, do you mind explaining what it is, just so I understand it? And then ever from then, we just had this understanding that I'd say I'm having an endo day, he'd leave me alone and I'd work from home. Simple. Loved my job. Changed manager, complete opposite. Was like, never talk about periods, like women are just classic woman, oh dramatic, oh woman, la, 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 that attitude. And my health, physical and mental, completely spiraled in that job to the point where I had to leave. And I always then just had this thing of like, it doesn't matter how good the company is, if your manager's not understanding, you're going to leave, because if you feel like you're ill and you can't communicate that, or you are ill and you are communicating it, it's not believed, you're going to feel shit, and then your health is going to be worse. So I had like started the blog just as like a hobby on the side, and then over the last couple of years was like, oh, like this brand that I love, that I tag all the time, has asked me if I want to make a video for them, and they're willing to pay for that video. And I was like, what? I was like, I'm making these videos anyway. And they were like, yeah, but you should be compensated for it. Like, you're helping us raise awareness on this. So and I was like, oh. And then I realised that there were so many things that I could do outside of it that would, one, mean that I could actually do what I love, which is talk about endometriosis all day, every day. But two, I could get paid for it. So I was like, oh, I can leave my job and do this full time. But the biggest part of it was, because I manage my calendar, it means that, and we spoke about this before, cycle syncing, I can manage parts of my cycle around that. So for example, there are 4 phases, isn't there? The first is menstruation, so like the first day of your period is the first day of your cycle, and then you go into your follicular phase. That's when like your energy starts to pick up a little bit, and then your ovulation, which is like when everyone feels a bit sexy and everything's great or whatever, or great for most people. For people with endometriosis, it can be a difficult time because your estrogen is higher, and so sometimes you can respond a bit funny to it. And then you have your luteal phase, which is the run up to your period, where everything just feels a bit shit. So in my luteal phase, I don't schedule anything that I don't enjoy. So like, I love creating content and I love doing podcasts and stuff like this. I'm in my luteal phase, so this is tick.
Perfect timing.
Nice.
If you were like, I've got an amazing opportunity for you, it's a talk in front of 1,000 people, and it was my ovulation or follicular, no problem, I'm there. If it was luteal, there's no way I'm doing it.
Wow,
So
that's really interesting how you schedule that.
Because otherwise, and coming back to you asking me about fatigue, that's what triggers my fatigue and my flares. So I'm very responsive to lifestyle triggers, which is great and crap at the same time, because if I'm eating well, exercising and managing my stress, my flares are very low. I just have the painful periods that come with endometriosis for me. If I'm not aligned with my cycle and I'm not eating right and I'm doing all of the things that I know trigger my endometriosis, like overworking during my luteal low phase, then I'm knackered. And I have that, like, do you ever have that feeling where you're so tired, where you feel like you're speaking to someone, but there's like a wall in between you where you're like, I see your mouth moving, but I'm not registering what you're saying right now.
It was actually about 4 hours ago, to be completely honest. I was on the sofa and my partner was like talking to me. I said, I'm really sorry, a minute. Yeah. I need to just let you know I'm not here. I'm not present. I'm not being rude, but I've just got nothing to give you right now.
Yeah.
I was like,
exactly.
Okay.
It like
now is the conversation done?
Zaps you out, doesn't it? So I've just found managing my lifestyle around that, and the best way for me to do that, because I just got so stressed at work, the best way to do it was to work for myself, which is stressful in itself. But like, at least I can manage my timetable, which was a huge part. And that doesn't mean that everyone listening to this needs to quit their job and like go self-employed.
I'm off, boys.
Yeah, exactly. I'm off. It just means if you can have that conversation with your manager about, can you work from home in the week before your period? Can you do all of these things. And in the job that I was in before, that was a no negotiation thing for me. So I was like, well, I can't negotiate that, so I'm going to have to leave. So yeah, it's a really big thing. And I think it's one of the things as well that I'm so grateful I've had the surgery, but I always knew after my last one, like I've got to put in the work at home, which can be really crap because it's really nice being spoon-fed all of the answers, but sometimes you've just got to put the work in the same way, like if you want to run faster, you've got to train.
Yeah.
If I want to feel healthy and not flare, I have to put in the work there as well.
It's really interesting how kind of self-aware you are with where you are in your cycle, because I just don't know. I think, because it doesn't help, I think, how crazy my life is with my knee and everything, that like you just kind of forget what to prioritise. But like the fact that you've had such success from being so self-aware of where you're at, like do you do anything in your diet? There's so many questions that I actually keep forgetting the next one. Do you do anything in your diet depending on what phase you're in? Like, do you cut something out in certain phases or anything like that?
Yeah, I do. Some of it's controversial, so I always say this is what works for me. Find what works for you. So started off with just tracking my cycle on an app. So I used an app called Stardust. It's just like super easy to use, and it's not one of like the super complicated ones. And that kind of roughly gives you like a nudge of what you should be doing. Like it'll tell you like healthy fats are really important at this point in time. But someone else who I found was called Dr. Mindy Pals, and she talks about fasting sometimes, and she talks about how important carbohydrates are, but she calls them like nature's carbohydrates, like sweet potatoes, carrots, things like that, versus like the super processed stuff. And she said at some point in your cycle having more of those is great, but at other points bringing them down and increasing your healthy fats is a good one. And she does it all around your cycle. So there's times where fasting can be really helpful and times where it can actually hinder your hormones, which is great because I went down the full-blown prolonged fasting from the get-go, because when I was diagnosed, I was like anti-inflammatory diets, and it kept coming up prolonged fasting. So I would fast for like 2-3 days at a time, because I was like, the relief I have from not eating because I have no flares is worth the hunger, like it's fine. But after a while, I realised like this is not sustainable, and then I was finding other symptoms creeping up, which now I know were because I wasn't fasting with my cycle, I wasn't eating with my cycle, because the menstrual cycle is so delicate and can go off balance. So I listened to her protocol, Dr. Mindy Pals' protocol, and just try and manage my stress around that. And one huge thing, honestly, other than my surgery, this is the number one thing that I would do, is magnesium. So like I said, I really struggle with constipation, and I'm talking I would take like triple dose laxatives, and the only thing that would happen was extreme cramping. Like there was no movement. And I had a colonoscopy, which is where you have like a pipe up your ass, and they were like, here's some laxatives, and I was like, you're gonna have to give me double, and they were like, no, you're fine. And they still didn't work well enough. Like it was really, really sore. But then again, Dr. Mindy Pals recommended a specific brand called the brand is called Bioptimizer, but the magnesium supplement is called Magnesium Breakthrough. And she said that she took 2 of those every night, and she was regular. And I was like, bullshit. But it was like 20 quid. So I was like, I'm going to try it. Only thing that has ever got me regular. Ever.
So did you take it purely for going to the toilet?
Yeah, purely for going to the toilet, but she said it was really good for like your hormones, because when your digestive system, and I never know if this is just a hippy dippy thing or whether this is a medical thing, your digestive system helps get rid of toxins. So if you're backed up all the time, everything is just staying in. Whereas when I was actually going to the toilet every single day, like my skin was a bit clearer, and this was all okay. And I ran out my magnesium last week, so I've not had it for 5 days. Extreme acne flares, not going to the toilet straight away after stopping it. So that for me has been really, really helpful. So as much as diet is important, magnesium, but specifically that supplement has been the one that's been helpful, and it's got magnesium citrate in it, which is the one that helps with constipation.
It's interesting how different it is, because mine's the opposite. I actually probably go to the toilet way too much.
Yeah,
like
loads of people have that. Why is that?
I go to the toilet all the time. It's actually honestly, isn't it? It's like a running joke with my staff, because with my staff, as if I've got like
it's like
with
all right for you, our staff.
No, I meant like with the staff. The staff, yeah. That like they're like, we need to schedule Fion's toilet time into the program, because I go like regularly in sessions. They're like, I look at like our S&C, and he's like, you want to go to the toilet, Jim? I'm like, yeah. And he's like, go on, off you go. I get through the warm up, and I'm like, he's like, yeah, she's going. Where's she going? Toilet. Yeah, she's going to the toilet. Like I go way too much. What's the think?
Yeah, it's kind of. In the past, they were labelled both as irritable bowel, which is, I hate the term in many ways, because we know that irritable bowel symptoms and endometriosis are one but the same. And we got data to say that there's biochemical changes affect how bowel functions. That certainly occurs. And there's certainly nerve disruption to bowel and bladder. So if you leave people with chronic endometriosis for many years, they often bounce to the Department of Gastroenterology and they get the label of, you've got IBS. People end up with colonoscopies. And some people even have to do rectal irrigation. Their bowel just does not work at all. And you can find populations of ladies with bowel disturbance, but also then populations with, again, bladder disturbance. So they have to catheterize themselves because the bladder's now stopped functioning. Their bowel doesn't work. They have to use irrigation. But in terms of IBS, you get this kind of change. Some people get a constipated variant of it, and some people get this sort of urgency, frequency.
Looking out it.
And it's kind of both for you. And it's almost like a holistic approach to identify that. The dietary stuff is fascinating, without a doubt. The more you read, people often say we've got no really good evidence of dietary manipulation for endometriosis, but that does not mean it does not work. That's the key.
I think
to
it's
it.
so individual, isn't it? Because like some people say, like, and for me, like, I know if I have too much gluten and too much processed stuff.
You just stole the words out of my mouth. I was just about to say that.
Yeah, it's like straight away as an issue. But my mum's a celiac, and like she was never diagnosed with endometriosis, but I'm convinced she had it. Always had the same issues. So like I know there are different things that trigger my food. But then I have a friend who lives off Haribo's. Like she has a bag every day, has endometriosis, not a symptom in sight. So like it's just such a personal thing, isn't it? Of like working through your triggers.
Yeah, well, so basically, I don't think I've told you this. I trialled going gluten-free for 3 weeks.
We trialled.
Technically, well,
I even made a
part-time
gluten-free
trialled.
apple crumble.
Okay, right, you part-time trialled, so you just did it with
I'm
me
joking.
in company. No, in fairness to her, right, I went gluten-free for 3 weeks, and in fairness to Gwen, whenever we were together, like on the weekends, Gwen would actually cook me gluten-free meals, and she didn't need to eat gluten-free, but she did do gluten-free with
Surprisingly,
me.
do you know tortilla chips that you just buy from the shop, gluten-free? Didn't know.
Well,
I thought
the
I'd have to
world
buy
of
gluten-free
gluten-free.
ones, but I didn't. It was great.
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
Anyway,
the whole world.
Carry on.
Anyway, so I was like, okay, let me try it, because like the whole endo bloat thing, I just feel like it's just a thing, and I was like, okay, is that something I'm intolerant to? Like, is it something that's like linked? Obviously, there's a lot of chat around there. Is there a link with gluten? I don't really feel any different. So
Can I ask a question though?
go for it.
Did you do gluten-free, as in gluten-free bread, gluten-free flour, or did you go like whole food that are just one ingredient and they're just naturally gluten-free? Because this is my issue with like, and this could be like a whole separate food, like thing, subject. I'm just gonna say it once.
Episode 3.
I, since having a mum that is celiac, and I am obsessed with reading labels now of food.
Yeah.
I read her gluten-free food and I'm like, I would rather eat concrete than that.
Yeah.
There is more sugar, it is more processed. And for me, although I know that gluten can be a trigger for many people because it's an inflammatory thing, if the food is processed, gluten or not, your stomach is like, now I'm having to process this thing.
So my nutritionist gave me advice when we'd agreed I was going to be trying gluten-free for 3 weeks. He goes, right, but I'm going to tell you something. Read the labels.
Yeah.
If it says gluten-free, you check the back. And if the back of the packaging has like a stupid amount of long things listed, then you put it back. Like, because I was like, okay, because I'm really fussy. So that's also not a good thing.
Yeah.
It doesn't help my endo because I'm actually a really fussy eater. There's millions of things that I don't like. So then I was like, okay, what do I eat for breakfast? And he's like, I know what you're going to do. You're going to drive to Tesco now and go to the gluten-free aisle and buy everything there.
Doesn't even taste nice, and it's
The
expensive.
bread's garbage,
It
man.
is garbage.
And it costs like £9 million for bread. But I actually didn't do much gluten-free. I don't think I did anything gluten-free.
No, I think you had like cereal in the cupboard, but
I
it's
did
still
never,
there.
but I never
It's
ate
actually
it. I
still
never
there,
actually
yeah.
opened it. I just like
Eat
I
things
went
that were
for
naturally
yeah,
gluten-free.
fresh stuff, more veg, and all that kind of stuff. Obviously helps anyway. But yeah, I didn't really feel any different, so I'm now not gluten-free anymore, which I'm really happy about. But one thing I wanted to touch back on was just the fatigue, because I was like, okay, is this something that links? And I was like, maybe I'll feel better after it, but just my fatigue has just been horrendous recently, more than ever, and even made me question like, am I even going to be able to do my job? Like, as an athlete, especially having my horrendous flares recently through exercise, I'm like, how can I expect to be a professional athlete if I can't even complete maximum exertion exercise, which I need to do to be good at my job? Then how am I going to be able to do my job? And I think that's the thing in my brain, and that's why I asked you about your line of work and how you've kind of got in, like, why you are in the position now you are. Because my brain recently has been like, it's making me, like my endo's making it pretty impossible for me to like be a rugby player at the moment.
It feels like you're hitting a barrier anywhere you go, and you're just like, I've had the surgery, it's still not fixed. My job is literally flaring me, so how can I do my job?
And it's like a vicious cycle of like, okay, need to turn up to work, need to exercise, obviously coming back from a different injury, and then trying to manage the flares, and it's just all this kind of vicious thing at the moment. But when you mentioned then about having the support that I've had, like as much as they have been amazing and they have really supported me, I'm still, and this is my own insecurity, that I'm still in the fear of, they could tell me, look, like, take your time, I'll give you a minute, or like they could be really understanding and empathetic, but my brain still like has that bit of doubt. Do they believe me? Do they believe me? Even though they are literally telling me, we understand what you're going through, being really supportive. I'm still not over, like I'm still trying to challenge myself all the time to like get rid of this doubt. And I think it's just what comes with this disease, that like,
well, you're not believed for so long, so why do you feel like they believe you now? And I totally get that, but I'd say you're in a unique situation where it's within
like I could see that going.
Got it. What I was going to say was, you're in a unique situation where like it's actually in their best interest professionally, not just morally, but professionally, to make sure that they are tending to you. So like, I know Dylan, my boyfriend, plays rugby, and he's the same. He's always like, oh fuck, my back's absolutely killing, I can't tell them. And I'm like, well, more fool you, because if you don't get the treatment you need, then you're not going to be match ready, and then you get to match day, you're screwed, and they're going to be pissed off that you've not told them that you're sore. So like, the more information you give them and the more you communicate, the more they can help you, the better you can do your job. And something else as well, you were saying about you flared during exercise. Have you tried tracking your cycle to see, is the same exercise okay at certain points in the month, to then guide your training further on?
So I was on Sorel, and then, which is the pill, and I was on it for a certain period of time, for 3.5 months, and I ended up coming off it because I was getting this horrendous discharge all of the time, like I've shit my pants pretty much, like every single day. And I was like, I had the doctor said to me, give it 3.5 months, like see if it dies down after that. I was like, fine, I'll suck it up for that amount of time, and if it doesn't come, if it doesn't stop by then, I ain't doing it, I'm done. I was like, I literally said I'd rather a painful period than living with this every day, because I feel disgusting. So I stopped it. As soon as I stopped, flares, and I hadn't had a flare since, and I think it's tough because my intensity in my exercises gradually got higher because of my knee getting better gradually. So like the intensity was growing, so I hadn't had a flare in a while. But it's just funny, as soon as I stopped my pill, then was building up to my period. The week building up to my period, really bad. And I was like, oh, it must be that phase then. So we said, we'll just manage it through that. Then it was like a week after my period. The worst flares ever. And it was every day then. It was like Thursday, Friday, back in on Monday. And then the Monday was the worst ever. And then we said then, okay, now you need to go back on the pill. And like the advice was to just double your dose and see how you feel from that. And then I have done exercise since, and thankfully I haven't had a flare. But then my physio was like, okay, let's just try and, because everything's trial and error with my job. It's like, you have to exercise, and we have to see what works. It's very individualized. So now we like break my running up. So I'll run, and then I'll go and do rugby skills or do something lower level to kind of like reduce the amount of like tension and bracing and inflammation all at one time, rather than doing like running, two off, like trying to reduce that level of intensity, breaking it up. I'm still getting the volume in, but I'm breaking it up over a long period of time so that I'm not under as much stress. So yeah, that's kind of...
One question I have for you, Tony. Obviously, I have had a similar injury to Ffion, and I was wondering like what the difference would be for someone who's suffering with endometriosis as almost an I always say anti-inflammatory, but it's not an anti-inflammatory, it's inflammatory condition. How would that then affect someone who is also recovering from a significant surgery somewhere else in the body? Because Fion's very hard on herself about timeline for recovery, and there's a couple of us that have had the same injury and we've come back, and I want Ffion to take it easier on herself because I need her to understand she's going through something significantly harder than what we've been through. So what is the link? I know obviously there's links between pain, but what would be the link in terms of recovery and how that inflammation can affect elsewhere in your body, especially when, you know, like I suffered from fatigue and things just through rehab's really hard. Like it's really hard, and that was hard enough in itself, but then having the inflammatory condition on top of that, how can that affect someone? And I want to get that answered for you.
Thank you.
So we've got a core cover question, and there's nothing published out there. It doesn't exist. Elite athletes, you're troublemakers, without a doubt. Yeah, always.
Soz.
And it is because many people I say, look, you must take it easy because with endometriosis, exactly. I mean, you laugh. You know, I've seen yourselves, I've seen Sky cycling team who will cycle to London after the operation the next day. The netball team are the same, the football team are the same. Without a doubt, it doesn't matter. All elite athletes are the same.
Well, you did say, you were like, right, how long? And he was like, oh, here she goes. Like, do you know what I mean?
you know, and I watched television expecting to see you play in that week. And that, you know, and I'd say, I knew you would do it. And that's a problem. I think endometriosis, you lose your reserve because you've got all this misery, the bag of endometriosis, chronic pelvic pain, sleep deprivation, feeling shattered. You've lost that already. So recovery is delayed because you've lost your reserve. And it's really difficult. On the other side of the coin, it sounds a bit weird. We've got some data, for instance, we know that endometriosis pain is equivalent to childbirth, and people who come and see me and who had babies, etc., for operations, and I ask what was childbirth like, and they say, hurt a bit, doc, but nothing like my endo pain.
No, genuine. My recent flare, like you swear there was a child coming out of me because I was literally, and some of the girls were like, they think they got PTSD from watching me because like I was rolling around, like you'd swear, and I checking down, is someone, what's going on? Like and everyone's asking me like how would you feel? I'm like, labour is literally the only feeling I could explain. That's what that would feel like, and I'm like, I breeze it now because I just can't. If you're a man, listen to this. It's horrible. All right, it's really, really horrible. Yeah. Sorry, I interrupted you, but I just wanted to back you up on those points.
You're spot on right. So I think we've got really good evidence that women with endometriosis do not have a low pain threshold. That's kind of the message I'm trying to get across. It's completely the opposite, it seems to be honest.
So interesting that in terms of like that's the stuff around sleep being affected, you're obviously like feeling like you feel the fatigue for a reason, and we know that you recover best when you're fully rested and you're not fatigued. So it's really interesting actually how recovery can take longer. That's what I wanted to get out of it, because
like, you're looking into my soul.
No, but it is. But it's on a serious note. Like in terms of just like an ACL injury, like the guidelines are 9 months for an elite athlete, but there's no guideline for an elite athlete with endometriosis. Yeah. So, and I just think that that's something that should be considered in recovery timelines, because it's not normal. It's not. You're not as fully rested. You've got other things to contend with, like things like having a flare throws a spanner in the works, and it's like you could map out your 8 months, but if you were to have a flare once a month, then that's going to throw a spanner in the works. It wipes
3 times in a week.
Well, yeah, but it wipes you out for a couple of days, and then you can't get to the intensity, and then that's going to prolong things. So
yeah, it does have a knock-on effect. Like I say, like if I run in the morning down the field and I got 4 sessions to go, I can't maximally give what I would have done if I hadn't had a flare that day. Like going to the gym in the afternoon, I got nothing to give. I'm like a zombie. Like I'm pasty, blending into the walls. Like,
and most people will just go to bed.
Yeah,
you know, and rest, but it's hard because it's your job, and it's like, how do you keep pushing through? Well,
that's the thing. Like, and to be fair, a lot of our staff have acknowledged like sleep is a major thing for me. So like, people can run off 7-8 hours. I'm sorry, I cannot. I literally need 9-10, like minimum. And if I get anything lower than that, I'm like, there's nothing.
If I ever share a room with her,
not many people want to.
Petrified.
Not many people.
I'm actually a little bit scared about Six Nations if we share a room.
Well,
because no, but I'm like a 6 a.m. waker, and she's like doesn't even know what 6 a.m. is.
If we need to eat breakfast for 8, girls getting up 7:45, 10 to 8, because I need every single minute that matters. If I'm falling asleep at 6 minutes past 10 at night, I'm like counting down the seconds. Right? If I fall asleep now by 20 past, I need to get up at 10 to. That means I'm going to get this amount of hours. That's how my brain
Whereas
works.
I'm awake, I've done mobility, and I've written in my journal, and I've had my coffee, and I've done this and this, so it just doesn't
You're
work.
the 5 a.m. club girl.
It's not for me,
one of
sorry.
those.
No, thank you very much. Just wanted to now, as we did in season 1 with the first episode, we put out on Instagram with some questions because we said you were coming back on. So we've asked if there's any questions people have got for you. I know, Sophie, you've got some good ones around fertility and things.
Yeah,
Would you like
get it
to?
up. There was one that I want to ask, actually, and it ties in nicely to what we were just talking about. So it was about natural ways of reducing inflammation, because we've obviously said, like, our body's fighting us, like, ourselves half the time, and then you've got to battle injuries or heavy workload or whatever it is. And it was about how do we reduce inflammation naturally, which I think is really important, because like we've already identified, you could have surgery which goes really well and helps to hinder, like, you know, things that'll happen in the future. But what can we do at home? And one thing that's come up, so I'm studying to do this menstrual health coaching course thing, and it's come up a lot about how fat cells disrupt our hormones, and if our hormones are disrupted, then that can then mean that something like endometriosis could flare more. So it's really important, obviously, to say that there's a certain level of body fat that is too low to the point where it's unhealthy, you lose your cycle, etc., etc. So we're obviously not talking about that category. But would you say that reducing body fat to a safe level is potentially a way of managing endometriosis pain through regulating your hormones?
Yes, without a doubt.
It is.
The classic thing, fat is not your friend.
It's good to know that is.
It is a beast. And it's a really interesting organ, because if you increase your calorific intake, you get more fat cells. You create more fat cells, and you lose weight then because you starve yourself and increase your exercise output. And these fat cells get smaller, but here's the beast of it is, you've still got more fat cells.
Yeah.
So the idea, once you gain weight and lose weight, you gain weight much easier. So it's a really challenging thing. It's an unpleasant thing in some ways. But fat is bad. It's an inflammatory process. It does disrupt hormones. It's biologically active stuff. It creates a type of estrogen in itself. And when you look at, for instance, gynae cancers, the one that is significantly increased is cancer of the womb. And the reason why is because of fat is increased in our population.
No way.
I'm so glad you said it, because I feel like so many people are, and I'm with the body positivity movement. I'm on about normal bodies should be fine. We shouldn't all have these six packs and whatever. But when it comes to like promoting borderline obesity, if not above that, because it's body positivity, as you've just identified, these fat cells are creating their own sources of estrogen, which for endometriosis is massively problematic.
That's really interesting.
Which is why if you do cycle track, you'll notice that your ovulation, you're meant to feel amazing, but actually you can have crippling pain during that time. And I think it is also like, it's so shit for people with endo, because what do you want to do when you feel crap?
Eat.
Piece of toast, chocolate, Ben and Jerry's, duvet on the sofa, and then it almost like feeds all of these symptoms, and it's such a cycle. But then also it's where like that personal responsibility comes in, and it's so annoying to live that healthier lifestyle, but it's just so hard. But I'm glad you have answered it, because it's something that a lot of people shy away from, but it is like the reality that body fat has a huge impact on it.
Yeah, I can't wait to tell George, our nutritionist,
I know.
that.
He's gonna love that.
Told you so. Did you have one on fertility?
Yes, I did. So, and this is something that I get a lot of, because I've personally frozen my eggs because of endometriosis, but it wasn't because I tried having children and was infertile, which is a lot of people go through that situation. Mine was because I had endometriosis surgery. It was emergency, and they almost removed both my ovaries. So I would have woken up with no fertility. So I know that endometriosis can cause infertility, and I think it's 50% of people with endometriosis struggle with fertility. So is it something that everyone with endometriosis should be talking to with their doctor? And if so, what should they be asking for?
Yeah, it's really important. So fertility is bizarrely difficult to study in the natural world, because you can imagine going in somebody's bedroom with a clipboard. That's not going to last very long. So from that point of view, it's really difficult.
Yeah.
But you can look at it in like a control population, which is basically IVF treatment cycles. And we know essentially if you've got endometriosis or a severe degree of endometriosis, your probability of an IVF treatment cycle working is halved.
Wow.
So you can do IVF without treating the endometriosis, but your chance is halved. So that's really important, and that's one of the things you have to tell people. So if somebody presents with infertility and is undergoing IVF, you'd want to say to them, have you got any signs of endometriosis? Because if you have, that surgery is a really good thing to do before doing IVF.
This is so interesting because I actually know someone who's going through IVF. Yeah. They've struggled quite a lot. They've said that they can see on a scan, which is quite rare to see on endometriosis on scans, isn't it? Or maybe not rare, it's just not always. Yeah. And they can see a spot, but they've just said to leave it there.
Yeah, so our NICE guidelines, our national guideline says if you've got signs either on ultrasound or symptoms, for instance, period pains, more than 2 paracetamol change your life because of period pains, or use a hot water bottle, you're likely to have endometriosis, and therefore you should have that conversation before jumping in and doing IVF. Yeah. So that's really important.
Yeah.
So fertility conversations is again one of those subjects we kind of ignore in life, and we don't know why. One of the things we wanted to do is to say to Welsh Assembly Government, we wanted to teach children about important things such as menstrual cycle and boys and girls sex. We never talk about really, except how to have babies and how not to have babies, but there's so many other really important things that we ignore. Endometriosis, we wanted to talk to school children to say, if you're rolling around once a month and your exam failing, this is not normal and we can do things for you. Please don't leave it. And that's kind of really important. And fertility. And I see many ladies come and see me, and very professional. They've been CEOs for various things, and they come in, they're 42, and they think, I fancy having a baby now. Can I have a baby? And now we say, well, your ovarian service now failed. It's going to be really difficult. And the sad thing is, people say, nobody told me.
And it's too late by that point, because sadly it is one of the things, like as much as like as women we can do whatever we want whenever we want, we do still have a biological clock. And it's why I was so lucky that I did freeze my eggs when I did, because my ovarian situation isn't great, but because I was 26 when I got my 2 rams, they were actually very successful. Whereas had it have been when I was 28, 29, 30, it might not have been so successful. So many people put it off and they're like, oh, I'll do it one day. And I'm like, just do it now, because one day might come and it might be too late.
Yeah.
Yes, often
it's really interesting.
So you talk to an 18-year-old about fertility, most people say, I have no interest, I'm 18. But 18 to 28 to 30, it goes really quick.
Really quickly,
And then suddenly you think, oh my gosh, I'm suddenly there.
So what would you, if you could kind of, like, what would be your aim that you would want educational-wise? Like, for these things, especially on infertility, because it's one thing we said that we didn't really cover last episode and we wanted to speak more about now.
Yeah, so infertility is really common out there. 1 in 8 couples present with infertility. And we don't talk about infertility. It's kind of really, it's one of those, another taboo subject we never mention. If you walk down the high street, you'll ask people, how are you and how's the weather? You never say, how's your periods, how's your bowels, and are you having babies? You
Unless
don't.
you ask, we would.
Except us, but
no secrets here.
That's how we rock, yeah. And you're thinking that there's kind of these cultural barriers why you don't ask, which is a sad thing, because actually those people with those problems may want to be asked. And that's fertility. We kind of shy away from fertility. We ignore it. We don't talk about it. And couples I meet, men and women, quite devastated, and they feel isolated in society then, because people won't talk to them, or there's a rumour they've got infertility, or they don't want children, this sort of stuff, which is sad, really. And I think identifying early, knowing what the risk factors are for infertility, knowing what a normal curve is, what is your chance of conception if you want to conceive and you're 25 years of age, and what's normal and what's not.
So you're saying, like, the risks. What are the risks?
So I suppose risks of infertility that are controllable is age makes a big difference. We know we've got data sets for that. So we know, sadly, fertility declines with age. And this is a radical thing, and it starts to decline 16 onwards. I'm not saying have babies at 16 because that's a really bad thing to do. But there is a deterioration. But between 25 and 35, the deterioration isn't that much, actually. You've gone from about a chance of about 80% of trying to conceive over 12 months at the age of 25 down to about 70% at the age of 35. But the curve becomes steep after that, and it suddenly starts to deteriorate somewhere between 35 and 40. The problem is that's for the average person, and we're not average. All of us are different. So our curves are all slightly different. So that's really important. So people often make an assumption and say, well, I'm less than 38, therefore I shouldn't have a problem. And that's not true. If you've got endometriosis on top of that, you've got to put these two factors, age and infertility, together and consider that. So one of the things you say to people with endometriosis, I say to people, don't have babies now. Don't go for Mr. Not So Right. That's not the level of thing. But contemplate what you're going to do over the next decade in your life, and just think about that.
That was my next question about what your advice would be. Maybe 2 different things, really. If someone was struggling, who was not diagnosed with endometriosis, what would your advice be? Would that advice be different to someone that's struggling with endometriosis, with infertility?
Yeah, it kind of is really to a degree. So you would say to people, if somebody's trying to conceive and approaches me and say, we'd like babies, we're trying to conceive, and you say, well, what does that mean to you? How long have you been trying to conceive without contraception? And if they say 1 month, you can say, well, carry on, the good work. Crack out your Barry White records and your flowers and whatever rocks your boat, yeah? That's cool, yeah? And so young couples, 12 months is quite acceptable.
Okay.
And I usually say to people, think about fertility investigations treatment at 6 months. You don't have to do anything at 6 months, but 12 months, get things ready for that time sequence. And then one of the things you would ask at that point in time, have you got any signs of endometriosis? Because that is going to change things.
What, for people that maybe don't know, what are the steps? You're saying, okay, you're at 12 months, you're not successful. What steps would someone need to take if they're the concerns that they have?
Yeah, so fertility is really the easiest of all specialties. It's spectacularly easy because we're only interested in 3 things: egg, sperm and tubes to join machinery together. Sperm is easy. We send men into men's room and we say, we're going to count your sperm. And that's what we do. That's a very easy test to do for obvious reasons. Yeah, and you can tick the box or not. And there's kind of things we can do to manipulate and improve that. Are you producing eggs is really easy as well. There's also the test, but the most predictive you can use, if your cycle length from one period to another is less than 35 days and has a regularity, you're profoundly likely to be releasing eggs. It doesn't tell you anything about the quality, but you're releasing eggs. And tubes, most tubes are healthy unless you've got risk factors. And there's really 3 risk factors: previous operations, previous pelvic inflammatory disease, which is in brackets, the majority chlamydial infection, which is really common. And the third thing, if you've got period pains more than 2 paracetamol, it's endo. And so so you wouldn't jump in and check fallopian tubes at that point in time. But if you had one of those 3 risk factors, then you would say, yes, I really would want to check your fallopian tubes, or at least offer it.
One question we had was, if you have been on contraception for a long period of time and then you stopped that contraception because you wanted to have a baby and you were trying and weren't becoming successful, like, is there like a period window where coming off contraception, like, do you need to give your body time? Like, can you catch or get pregnant if you haven't had a period since you've come off that contraception? Does that make sense?
Without a doubt, yes. So there's this real myth that contraception lasts when you stop it, and that's definitely not true. For instance, if you take a combined pill or you have a coil removed, fertility will return within that month. So people think, I'll stop the pill, I'll wash out of my system for 3 to 6 months. You may have a surprise that you're not expecting. The only offender in that is this thing, Depo-Provera, where they inject you in the bottom with a big needle every 12 weeks. And what people often aren't told about that is when you inject it, even if you don't have an injection, it may turn off your ovaries ovulating for at least 12 months after.
Wow.
So when
And people aren't told that.
No.
Well, they frequently, I've met many ladies who say, I never knew. Why are my periods still irregular? And I said, and there's nothing we can do.
How do you know then if your ovaries are off? So, like, say if you stopped having the injection and you didn't have you hadn't had a period yet, is that a flag that your ovaries are off?
Yes.
Right.
You're profoundly likely you haven't ovulated.
Can I ask a question then on the note of ovulation and how important it is? Because that's something doing this menstrual health course that it completely blew my mind. So I always was on a pill that stopped my ovulation, and they said, that's great news. And I thought it was great news because they said, and then learning about like the joys of ovulation, like the injection of amazing hormones that you have that help your body absorb nutrients, and like bone density, and why when women go through menopause and they don't ovulate and their estrogen is lower, they have osteopenia or osteoporosis if it's further down the line. So why is it so acceptable to have pills that shut off ovulation, or that ovulation isn't thought of as something important? Because in this course, and again, like I've not qualified, and 2, I'm not a doctor, but it looks like your menstrual health is one of the biggest indicators of your overall health. Like if you're unwell, oh Christ, this mic every time, get too excited. If your menstrual cycle is off, I always think of it as like a car dashboard, like your oil is flagging, you need to fix it. So for example, for me when I'm stressed, and I only notice this because I've got the Aura ring now which tracks my temperature. Nice. I was really stressed and I was just an absolute demon. I got my period and I was like, oh, my cycle's normal, I got my period, checked my app and there was no ovulation that month. So like nothing. And I was like, but okay, so I've had a horrible month. My mood's been low. My mood was always low through university, and I was on a pill which stopped my ovulation. So if ovulation is so important for our overall health and maintenance of our cycle, why do we shut it off so easily?
Yeah, it's a good one. And it's almost depends which contraception you're using, what the pros and the cons are.
Yeah.
If you use the combined pill, you get loads of estrogen on board. That's really good. So, you kind of feel better. If you like estrogen, you need it. But about 15% of people, you start depriving people of estrogen, they start to feel it. And the 15% of people who don't ovulate, if you give progesterone only, for instance, feel a bit flat.
Yeah.
I just don't feel bouncy. I've lost that, the first part in your description of how you feel at ovulation. Great.
Yeah.
Some people don't feel any different and they just feel the same. But certainly some people really do feel a difference. And people perceive that. I've certainly got friends who were on progesterone-only pills and worked as a contraception, great from that point of view, and they've stopped it and they feel better. And I don't want to go on it again.
Yeah,
for that reason.
so it can change how you
so
feel.
that's really interesting because Sorel is progesterone only, right?
Yes, it is.
So, and I was on it, came off it, flared loads. I've gone back on it and now I'm double dosed because to prevent me from having flares. So, and that's like progesterone only. So that's quite interesting because I'm on the pill, not from a contraception point of view. I'm on it to basically help me stop flaring. So it's interesting. Why would that kind of help stop that? Or why would that be recommended to stop? Does that make sense?
Endo's interesting because often people think it's estrogen that drives endo, and that's not quite true.
Is it not? Because I tell people that, so I need to stop saying that. Because I thought it's because estrogen was high. No, I thought estrogen grows because I thought endo grows because estrogen was high.
Use the beast of it all.
Oh, I'm giving it people false info. Sorry, everyone.
Really low estrogen, as in after the menopause.
Right.
Endo virtually always gets better. And I put virtual because some people don't, but virtually always does. So very low estrogens get better. And then the other population is in pregnancy. And so people with really high estrogen levels in pregnancy go, wow, I did feel quite well, actually. So certainly pregnancy is nowhere near a cure for endometriosis.
Yeah, just where it's come from, maybe.
But when you're pregnant, you're thinking, actually, so if you've got a really high estrogen level that's steady, but what endo levels is fluctuations in hormones. High estrogen.
Interesting.
So
that's why ovulation can be so painful because you have the surge.
Yes, so you've got this hormonal change. You've got physical changes as well. Certainly ovaries are about 3 times the size of normal. So if you've got a squashed ovary with adhesion, that's going to increase in size and cause pain.
So, okay, estrogen spike, if my is an example, my estrogen spiking would make me more susceptible to flares or make me more inflamed. So then the progesterone only is obviously trying to really balance that estrogen out. Does that make sense?
Yes, it's essentially, yes. So estrogen is what they call an anabolic drug, essentially. It increases cells division. That's where you get a thick lining of the womb. And it does loads of really nice things for you. Estrogen's a wonderful drug. Keeps you young, makes your skin better, etc. And then progesterone is almost the reverse in some ways, stops that effect happening in some ways.
Right, why have I got double dose then?
there is a good reason, yeah. So desogestrel is a bit unusual. It's a very unusual progesterone. And it does stop ovulation because it is a contraceptive, and so it stops the fluctuations in estrogen, so you get almost like a more of a steady state in it. And so it's, if you compared to other hormonal contraception, it's more effective, and that's kind of why you use it. And we use double dose as gynecologists because the single dose is really for a contraceptive, and we've got some data to say if you have a double dose, your chance of not ovulating is greater, and you tend to get better symptom control from it.
Brilliant. Weekend, so.
Good news.
Is there any downsides then to not having your ovulation though, in terms of like the other health impacts?
Yeah, it's kind of, yes is the short answer. And if you're not ovulating, there's 2 reasons. Either one, you haven't got any hormones from it, so your estrogen is very low. If your estrogen is low, you're not getting the bone protective benefit from that. That's what estrogen is useful for.
This
Take
is
some
why
calcium.
I
But here's the weird thing about it. So every 12
Just don't know what to do. What's the right thing to do,
Yeah.
Sorry,
He's
carry
got to
on.
answer it now.
It's a really good one. And that's why there's no perfect answer.
No, it is really individual, isn't it?
And it is individual. People on progesterones, so there's some really lovely studies looking at how thick your bones are, how much calcium you've got in your bones, and all the hormones. that you use. And weirdly enough, if you take oral progesterones and you start measuring bone mineral density, it doesn't change.
Okay.
To any great extent. If you take Depo-Provera, it does. And so that's one of the things
Yeah, I
they
heard
say.
that.
Not to a massive amount, but it does. And you've got to compare all these things. Taking coffee, not doing exercise, smoking. These are
Like,
risk
what's the
factors.
lesser of evils?
I'm
Yeah.
it's a
literally only taking the pill because of endo. Like, I'm not doing it from a contraception point of view because if I could have it my way, I'd have nothing. So I could just be normal, try and have a normal cycle, normal hormones. I'm literally only taking it because of endo. And like, I came off it because I was like, nah, I was happy to come off it because I was like, get all natural again. I was happy to have a period even though it was painful. But then it was the flares and everything. So I'm literally like, it's like trial and error for me at the moment to find out what works.
This is where I'm at. I've gone completely natural, but
yeah,
my
I've seen that. I've seen you speak about that on your Instagram.
Yeah, but I always said it was an experiment. So and this comes to the last question that I had, because I think we've gone through all the other ones. I had a really positive experience with the Marina coil, and they always said that was the best sort of one to go on for endometriosis. I had a really positive experience. Anytime I posted about it online, people would come for me. They'd be like, this is the devil's work. You're telling people all the wrong information, all of that stuff. But then when I had it removed, because I was getting my eggs frozen, they put it back in. And I was like, I get why people call it the devil's work. Like, I had all of the horrendous symptoms, constant migraines, constant bleeding, felt like something was lodged in the wrong place. They checked it, it was in the right place, and I had to get it removed. And I was gutted. And I always said it was so good the first time that I'm willing to give it a third go. So I'm actually on the waiting list to get it now put back in. But I was interested to see, and it was what a lot of people messaging about, is one, why does the Marina coil apparently works so well for endometriosis, and why do so many people struggle with it?
I got offered this. You were like, do you want to consider the coil? I said, absolutely not. No, thank you. That thought of that, I said, no, you can keep your coil. I wouldn't want it, thank you.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing. Coil is fascinating. It really is. The Marina coil particularly has done some absolutely amazing thing. As a contraception, it's fantastic. It reduces your chance of cancers of the uterus as well, just for good measure to throw in.
Wow.
It has a use for people who've got high risk for malignancies of the uterus as well. But we use it for endometriosis, and there's kind of reasons why. Marina, I often consider it as being the same as Marmite. You're going to love it, or you're going to hate it. I've never met anyone who says, it's all right. You're on two camps.
Yeah.
And your probabilities, 8 out of 10 would say it's great, best thing ever, and 2 out of 10 is the worst thing I ever had, the devil's instrument. And that's Marina.
Yeah.
It really is two camps. All that trial data, weirdly enough, says whichever method of hormonal contraception you use, they're equally effective, although the side effect profiles are different. And that's why it's kind of individual to you. And I think that's why. So people have a combined pill and say, I'm great on it, doc. And next lady will say, progesterone pill is the right thing for me. But when you look at endo symptoms, people often say, what's the best thing, doc? People often say Marina. I see this quite often in primary care. They say Marina is better. And I say, okay, but there's no evidence to support that statement. It may be better because one of the rules is the more invasive a procedure is, the more painful it is, sounds a bit weird, the more placebo effect you get.
Okay.
So having a
It must be
Marina,
worth
it
it.
must be
Yeah.
better.
Yeah.
But actually, we haven't got evidence to support our statement.
What I liked about it is I just didn't know it was there. Just kind of did its thing.
How though?
But look, honestly,
The
because
thought
it's
of it
just,
makes me
you do
like-
forget about it, honestly. And my first one they put in whilst I was asleep.
Yeah, well,
so it
yeah.
went mid-surgery, so that was a dream. But I have had it put in whilst I was awake, and it wasn't awful either.
It's because you got a high pain
but-
threshold.
maybe. I think it was just a good doctor doing it. But the main thing is, 1, I didn't know it was there, 2, it wasn't painful, and then 3, it stopped my periods. It's like I wasn't bleeding, but also it didn't make me psycho. Whereas with me, the pill, everyone knew if I was on the pill because I was a demon. So it just didn't affect my moods either. So yeah, I'm looking forward to trying it again. But I like that you said it's a natural, like it's person dependent, and so many
Yeah.
people online get scared by people saying, oh my God, it's hell, do not get it. And I'm like, you don't understand the power of what you've said, because you might be stopping
Somebody
having
else-
a treatment which is life-changing. Because I've experienced it being life-changing. I've also experienced it being very painful.
And I think
so just try it.
Yeah, and the message is how individual it is. Like
Yeah,
everyone's
everything.
symptoms are completely different, and like the pill might work for me and not work for you. So like you
Yeah.
said, like, it's people being aware that message
Yeah.
could change. Like,
And
and it's okay to have an opinion, but making sure that you make that opinion known. It's just that's your experience, doesn't
and
necessarily
that goes
mean...
for everything. It's the
Yeah.
merino coil, it's the diet. Like, so many people go, I'm not going to bother trying a healthy diet because so-and-so did it and it didn't do anything. And it's like, well, so-and-so might have done it for 1 week and not done it
Yeah.
right, or it might just not have helped them, but it might help you. Same with doctors. Like, my first surgery for endometriosis, it was only in the pouch of Douglas, no problem. Then I saw a proper surgeon who was like, it is everywhere.
Yeah.
So it's just like, I could have gone online and said I hated doctors, they were crap, this, that and the other. But then I found a really good doctor. So it's just important, like, where you get your information from. And it's why I always say, like, if you can go straight to an endometriosis specialist, is 100% the way to go.
Nice.
Nice. On that note, I'm going to grab the...
Grab it quick, yeah.
I think I'm going to wait for... I think that was a really good way to end, because that really that
does.
really
That's good.
brought it all back, and like
That's good.
it's a completely individual thing, and I
Yes.
think
100%.
that's a good message to get across. You've
I'd
tied-
love
tied-
to.
I have, I've tied it in a little bit.
All right then. So we have a closing tradition on the podcast, which is
Okay.
kind of stolen from Diary of a CEO.
You don't need to say that now, we're season 2, we
Yeah,
start
but
out.
people might listen to this episode for it. And he actually goes, we have a closing tradition on this podcast. That's why I just said it was stolen. But anyway,
That's not...
yeah, I know. Okay, so basically the previous guest leaves a question for the next guest without knowing who it is.
Okay,
So
cool.
your question, your top tip for when you're in a dip.
Call your hype man. Like, whoever your hype man is, call
Nice.
them, because things like putting on good music or having a good conversation can completely change your mood. I call Sevs, she's also called Sophie, but my best friend Sevs, because it doesn't matter what I'm feeling or how I'm feeling. She knows me better than anyone. And she's like, it's just your time of the month. You know that you can come out of this. You know all of that stuff. So I call her straight away and she gets me out of my dip. So whether it's your friend, your mum, your partner, anyone, just call your hype man.
You're my
Nice.
hype man.
Aww.
Well, I did ring you earlier, and the first thing
No,
I
you
said to you
did.
answers is I can't wait for a hug.
Yeah. Oh, I haven't actually hugged you yet.
It's all right, you can keep it for after.
That's the quickest anyone's ever answered a question, by
Yeah,
the way.
honestly, it's
It was
just
as if
easy.
you had that on the tip of your tongue.
No,
ready to
because
go.
this
like you knew.
morning I had the day from hell, and the first thing I did was call Sophie. So I
Yeah.
was like,
Oh,
well,
that's
there
nice.
we go. Yeah,
Ah,
so
that's
Sevs,
good.
my
What about
hype man.
you?
I think compartmentalise your day. You have a bad day, it's done. And then go to bed and then forget about it. And I do that. If you get a dip day, if you get an awful day, everything's gone wrong from start to finish. You've got soaked, you've whatever, you jumped in the car, it's broken down, you got a flat tire, you
We've all been there.
ticket, you get there. The operation is awful, you've had a nightmare, you think, I haven't done a good job today, I'm a rubbish doctor. And you think,
Oh, you're not.
oh, but
No, but he's in a dip
No,
day.
I know, but I'm just reassuring you that you're
But,
not.
people do get
I'm
dip
your hype
days,
man.
yeah.
The plant just had a...
And you go to bed and you wake up the next day and you think, it's a new day. The
Yeah.
sun's come up,
Yeah.
and that's really important in life.
Nice, that's really good.
Well, that was an epic episode.
That was so good.
Absolutely loved it.
I loved
I feel like I've learnt loads.
I know, I feel like I'm in some CPD.
CBD.
I always get it mixed up. CPD course, and I'm like, this is incredible. And I can't wait to watch it back and make notes.
Obviously, we are both new to this world with endo. We're learning all the time. So the work you guys are doing to really just spread awareness and support as many people as possible is incredible. So thank you for giving up your time to come and spend it with us this evening. It's been really, really good.
Really nice. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for
Yes,
having us. I
absolute
loved
pleasure.
it.
Thank you.
If you all want to like, subscribe, and leave a review, please do.
And remember,
Keep saying it how it is.